you did say that you think the most lethal form of assassin is a skilled craftsman.
Yeah.
Would you say that there's a profile of an assassin?
Well, there do seem to be, when it comes to things like bombings, then people with a fairly good technical grasp, like clock makers or watchmakers or people with technical skills and use of their hands. I would say, or carpenters, they're pretty up there as effective, and they've got a lot of patience. I mean, the man who came very close to killing Hitler in November 1939, Georg Elser. I mean, he spent three weeks worth of nights in this empty beer hall, excavating a column on a podium, and then putting this very carefully constructed bomb inside it, which had a week or 10 days advance timer on it, and he set it for in the middle of when Hitler would have been speaking, and he undoubtedly would have killed him had Hitler not decided to cut the speech short. But, he made this very sophisticated device, and it was like insulated with cork in order to make sure no one could hear the ticking.
Oh, wow.
After that, Hitler took sort of, along with many more security guards, he took sort of professional clockmakers as part of his entourage to listen out for ticking.
Oh, amazing. I didn't know that.
No, he did, yeah. He had the clockmakers, all ears for the ticking.
Yeah. Did they find any extra attempts?
No, I don't think there were any other ticks found, but this man clearly knew what he was doing. And then somebody who tried to blow up Zara Alexander II was a carpenter working in the Winter Palace, and he built a bomb 2 floors down from the Tsar's dining room. And again, had he actually been in the room rather than hanging around waiting for his guest, he would have been blown to pieces too. So, people like that, you don't want doing it.
But, just a side note before I ask my next question. Zara Alexander II, I remember learning about him, and he is, aside from the final attempt, which unfortunately took his life, he was a very lucky man. He dodged many, many attempts.
Yeah, no, incredible ones. I mean, there's one in my book which is about an attempt to blow up his royal train. And it ended up blowing up the baggage and supplies wagon, and there was a massive viscous red all over the place, which people at first thought was blood, and it was in fact raspberry jam going to the imperial pastry chefs. I love that they hit the jam carriage,
instead of him.
This train,
So obviously it's the skilled craftsman that can provide the tools and the means, but is it maybe a different kind of profile for more of the, like the NKVD kind of style?
Oh no, they were the most fascinating ones in the book. I mean, as I said to somebody else, they're the ones I would least like trying to kill me. You would really be frightened. And what I liked about them was just the extraordinary levels of deception that they could create around themselves. So although many of the ones that I wrote about were actually, by origin, they were Lithuanian Jews, basically from eastern Lithuania. But they sufficiently reconstructed themselves as Spanish that when they went to fight in the Civil War in Spain, attached to the Republican forces, to the communist part of the Republican forces, and they sort of ran secret police operations in Spain. These are Soviet secret policemen. And essentially, they knocked off any sort of Trotskyite dissidents or anybody deviant from Stalinism. And then they killed a lot of sort of nationalist prisoners as well, Francoist prisoners. They murdered them. But these men were just, and 1 or 2 women, were just extraordinary. I mean, they became effectively Spanish. And then, of course, with that experience, because they by that time would all be fluent Spanish speakers, they would be deployed, on other operations after the Spanish Civil War abroad, so that, the mother and son team that eventually did kill Trotsky had both been involved in the Spanish Civil War doing what I've just described. I mean, the son, Ramon Mercado, was a professional assassin.
Do more modern assassinations not scare you more? There's this idea that you're never safe, nerve gas. I mean, you only have to look at some of the instances in the UK that have happened to...
Well, yeah, I mean, the Soviets actually have been using sort of toxins for a very long time. There's a quite good recent novel called Untraceable by a Russian novelist called Sergei Lebedev, which it sort of traces, it says that it goes back to when the Weimar Republic and the Red Army under Trotsky, had deals to do all sorts of secret weapons development. Like, the Germans couldn't have an air force, but they had an air force flying around in Russia, and tanks, and of course poison gas and toxins, which they jointly developed. So he says it goes way back to that. And there are one or two instances in the book in the 1950s where they use radioactive thallium to kill somebody, the KGB. It's not a new thing. And that, that's a weapons grade thing. And of course, now they're doing it, they've done it with Alexander Litvinenko and with Sergei Skripal, where they're using, military grade nerve agents. And they don't seem to mind doing it very visibly.
That's the scary part.
I mean, those two GRU people made no attempt to hide their faces walking around Salisbury, when they were going window shopping. And in fact, it turns out that the same two men, using the same two false identities, they blew up a huge privately owned arms depot in the Czech Republic a few years ago to stop the weapons being sold to the Ukrainians.
Right.
They entered Czechoslovakia using exactly the same identities they used to get into Britain.
Did they?
They didn't bother to change the identities.
Can't work out if that's just laziness or just...
I think it's saying to you, we don't care.
Yeah.
I think the GRU in particular, which, it's directly under the Russian general staff, so it's under military command. I think they're sort of gung-ho commando type people, and they don't care. Nothing else would explain how sloppy what they're doing is.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness, well that definitely...
I mean, the interesting thing is that they then, there's a marvellous investigative thing called Bellingcat, which is a sort of private open sourced thing which started in somebody's bedroom, actually. Britain. And they use open source data. Initially, they did it to discover the origins of weapons being used in Syria, exactly who had dropped what and where it came from. But they did a lot of work on the people who tried to kill Skripal. And they were the ones who discovered that there was a sort of senior officer hanging around in a hotel in Paddington who was actually in charge of the operation. So they identified him. And then they traced it back and then found there was actually a whole special unit in the GRU which does sabotage and assassinations back in Russia. And they finally identified who was in charge of that. And then they did a very funny thing, because the man in charge didn't have any social media presence at all, as a Russian general. But of course, his wife was stupid enough to be on Facebook. And there was a big family wedding of the daughter. And guess who all the guests were, which she put their photos all over Facebook. She was popular with her husband. But it's
my God, I bet.
But with modern social media nowadays, it's very easy to find out about anybody, I guess.
To end on a lighter note, because it is a sunny Friday, and can you recall your favourite story of a defunct assassination attempt? Although we have discussed a lot, so maybe you could also say the one that you believe changed the course of history the most. Because let's be honest, no matter what anyone says, including Disraeli, assassinations change the course of history.
No, they certainly do. I mean, if you think of the one I start with, which is Caesar, which I got really interested in for all sorts of reasons, you forget, partly because of Hollywood, you forget that Rome was a republic for 600 or 700 years, and that the death of Caesar marked the moment where it transitioned into being an empire. He wasn't an emperor. He was declared a god after his death. But I mean, Octavian becomes Augustus and is the first Roman emperor. And then after that, in not just, in the Western Empire, there's emperors down to whatever, 450 AD. But in the Eastern Empire, they go on to 1453 in the Byzantine Empire. So that's a huge transformation of the political culture, that what was a very venerable republic is turned into a monarchy. Like, what could be bigger than that? And then I thought the Lincoln one was very interesting because, of course, you know, the advent of Andrew Johnson, who was a slave-owning Southerner, as president, he did his very best to stick spokes in the wheels of all of Lincoln's emancipatory measures, you know, preventing black people from voting or getting proper and being able to have a farm or whatever. And he set the whole thing right back to where it was effectively before Lincoln. So that had catastrophic consequences, I would have said, which America is still very much living through.
I really honestly enjoyed the book. I thought the detail was extraordinary, and I do think that you are a very good storyteller. It's
I'm trying to always, of course, put in the context in which these stories happen. So the trick is to be able to describe enough of the background of what's going on to make the assassination comprehensible. I mean, you know, in the case of both Lincoln and Yitzhak Rabin in Israel, there's no getting away from the fact that the sort of virtually lone assassins, and I know it was a few people in the case of Lincoln, but it was one person and probably his brother in the case of Rabin. They did represent a very big slice of American opinion in the 1860s and a very big slice of Israeli opinion in the 1990s. You can't just, well, they came out of nowhere. I mean, this atmosphere had been created by people, poisonous, divided atmosphere, and these people saw themselves as the executants of one side of it.
Yeah. No, I agree.
In the book, you know. There you are. All right, that's enough, isn't it?
Thanks, Michael. Always a pleasure. No, that's all good. Thank you so much for your time again.
We'll at least have 3 years before we have to do this again with another book. Might even
all right. I promise.